So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton here to some fine poets, 3 of them that founded Supporting Women Writers in Miami at the Betsy 4 years ago. And Catherine will tell you a little bit more about it and tell you what to expect this evening. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at Zoom and Facebook Live. I'm Catherine Esposito Prescott, along with my colleagues, Jen Karetnik, down below, and Caridad, I'm being so informal, Caridad Moro-Gourlier. The 3 of us are the swim team. SWIM stands for Supporting Women Writers in Miami, as Deborah mentioned, and to that end, we publish a poem a day at SWIM every day. And along with our cultural partner, the Betsy, we program a reading series at the Betsy Hotel, Betsy Year-Round series. We just want to extend our deepest gratitude to the Betsy and to FIU and BUS for inviting us to join this fantastic series, Zen and the Art of series. It's so clever and it's so timely, and we need art now more than ever. It's both a solace and a balm and something just to kind of bring us out of these times and into a deeper understanding of the world around us. So we're eternally grateful to participate, and a deep thanks also to Miami-Dade County Division of Cultural Affairs for enabling us to do these events with closed captioning. I don't think our readings will ever be the same after this series. So tonight, we are excited to bring you 2 fabulous female writers from Florida and New York, Caroline Cabrera and Juliana Gray. You can just give a little wave. So the format for tonight's reading is we will introduce the poet and then she will read, and then we'll introduce the next poet and she will read. After the poets read, we'll have a salon type discussion where you can pose questions to the poets. Should you have any questions for the poets, either as they're reading or when they're done reading, please send those questions through the chat to Jen Karetnik. Jen will field all the questions and lead us through the salon. As Deborah mentioned, the event is closed captioned. If you'd like to see the closed captions, and this is your first time with us, just go to the bottom of your screen and click on closed caption, and then you can view either the captions running across the bottom of your screen, or you can view the entire transcript as we proceed. Also, for those of you who are new to Zoom, which I don't think anyone here is new to Zoom, but we're all pretty Zoom fluent by this point. But we do recommend watching and listening to this series on the speaker view. We find it, for us, it's less distracting and it helps bring us closer and creates a little bit more intimacy with the poets as they read. So lastly, we'll be posting links to the poets' books in the chat. If you love what you hear, and we know that you will, and you want to read more on your own time, please go ahead and click on the links and buy their books. So, without further ado, let's bring on the poets. Our first poet reading tonight is Caroline Cabrera. Caroline is the author of 3 poetry collections, most recently Saint X, winner of the Hudson Prize from Black Lawrence Press. Her lyric essay collection, Lack Begins as a Tiny Rumble, is forthcoming this winter from Tinderbox Editions. She teaches poetry workshops for children and adults through OMiami and works as an early literacy specialist. She is founder and editor of Bloom Books and co-host of the very fun Arts and Advice podcast, Now That We're Friends. Please welcome Caroline Cabrera.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to everyone at SWIM and the Betsy for having me tonight. I'm really excited to be a part of this, and I'm so excited to hear Juliana read in a bit. I'm going to start with a piece. Actually, the forthcoming book is now a real book in the world, and so I'm going to lead with a piece from Lack Begins as a Tiny Rumble, which is a collection of hybrid lyric essays.
And I'm going to interrupt here just so if I'm on speaker view, you can all get a big view of the book and of Caroline's cat.
He just knows his cue. Okay. This is just going to be a thing with him right now, I think. Lay down, buddy. Okay. So I'll start with this piece from Lack Begins as a Tiny Rumble. Just once, I'd like Jason Derulo to drop by and call me love or baby girl, and let me know I'm on the right track. I'm lying. I want it more than once. I want weekly encouragement. I'd say Derulo, and he'd know I was spelling it Derulo with my tongue. We'd talk about Miami. Then we'd dance, because I don't know how much more Jason Derulo and I have in common. We'd count our Caribbean parents. Some days the world works, like I cry thinking about my sister and then she calls and we talk about her life. I know she needs me and she knows I need her. In a perfect world, I live on one side of a duplex with my husband and my sister lives on the other side, with or without whomever she wants. We own a bakery or bookstore or water sports training facility. I write all the time and my sister lies on a couch while I read to her about epidemics. My husband grills shrimps and fishes. I don't mind sweat. I don't mind the sticky sweetness of bodies. Give me sun, give me frangipanis and tea dark feet. My husband tries almost constantly to escape from our life. He says, let's just move, as if it's simple, as if no one depends on us. To be honest, few people depend on us. I depend on my pride to keep moving me forward, and so there's an inherent danger to moving on. Because of lions, the word pride feels multiple, and so really I am never alone. On the radio, a woman encourages listeners to embrace the idea of quitting. She means something like, nothing can go on forever, so don't fight it. I keep waiting for something to arrive for me, for some good news to push me forward. Why the hell should I be so special? I wait to hear the clang of the mailbox after the postman puts the mail inside. I've heard that people kill themselves more frequently on Sundays than on any other day. No post, nothing good is coming. I don't know if this is true, but I disseminate the information recklessly anyway, as if to say, beware of Sundays, you can never be too careful. I've read that when uncertainty is entered into their lives, rats will dose themselves over and over again. They need the drug to come through, and then they need it more. I didn't read that. I was told about it. But to say I read it lends legitimacy. I check my email again and again. I have nightmares and wake relieved, but also I dread falling back into a nightmare. Less frequently, I dream wonderful things, and when I wake, disappointment settles in my throat. I walk onto the front porch to survey the neighborhood and see if anything has changed in the night. Nothing changes. I look down the streets. Nothing good ever comes, but it could. Now I'm going to read a new poem that I actually wrote right before all of this started, so it has nothing to do with that. This is called Poem for When the Boy on the Street is a Boy You Love. 1. Or loved, or can you tell the difference beneath the streetlight? Can you see his face without seeing his face? There is an hour dark enough to make your body into a darkened star, into a drawer for what is no more. You embrace, bodies moving with recalled closeness. What do you call love when it is a memory? Grief? How do you tell the body what is here and what is gone? 2. Of course you loved the boy, so beautiful and sage-colored, laid next to him clothed on a twin bed. In a photo, you sit on his lap and drink light beers from bottles. He is trapped in movement so that you can almost imagine him speaking, or imagine yourself tipping his chin with your hand, turning his face back to you, who were always so selfish for his attention, whose desire was a prayer. 3. When you see him on the street carrying some part of his belongings in a backpack and some other part of his belongings wrapped in a blue and white striped hotel beach towel. When he sets this beach towel on the ground and you notice it and think, spindle stick, then correct yourself, spindle. When he says, actually, I'm homeless right now. When he says, how long has it been? And you say, 15 years. When you say, You look exactly the same. And he says, so do you. When he says, well, you know my family, and you do know his family, or knew his family, it muddies again. 4. When you knew the boy, every feeling was an ache. You were underwater in the world. You listened to chamber music and hoped to die. You hoped your cruel boyfriend would die. Every time he ran late, the idea sprouted like a single strand of wheat. You wore ridiculous clothes. With the boy, you watched movies late and whispered. You traded music. You danced and sometimes drank. You sat on his lap, the pose casual, your body relaxed. 5. You return to the photograph. What hurts him is real and in the world, is traceable on his body, is his skin against the wind. What hurts you is in the photograph, is the scent of night blooming jasmine on a chain link fence, a song on repeat. Your love does not matter and both of you will die. On the street, he says, I don't want to keep you. He is beautiful and not because you loved him. This is another newish poem. You're my man. In that, I am responsible for you. A miscarriage of justice, really, considering my sullen emptiness, my rather apparent lack. When you were born, your tiny bones terrified me. What if you rolled off the coffee table? Or if by accident I karate chopped your soft and undeveloped skull? Shit happens. Shit happens to me, and sometimes I am the shit happening in all directions. Sometimes I look into your face, which is also in many ways my face, and think, he is full of shit. He has grown, and now is a man. And I am not your mother, and I am not your sister, but I would let you call me either, have called myself each in turns. When you were born, or more, when you began to grow, I began to know that your growing might mean away from or into, notions I could barely stand to entertain, like the white pain of holding ice against skin. I have gravitated towards this species of pain. In that sentence, pain is a heavenly body, and I a less significant heavenly body, which is why I like that sentence so much. I am not so demure as to ignore my better attributes. This isn't about me, but about the way wheat grows in field and sometimes goes to rot. When a plant panics and puts out seed, they say that it has bolted, but there it stays in its tidy row, which says something about genetics, which is not the same as saying something about family, though that distinction is immaterial to us, who are each other's every relative. Wheat is not a sexy way to think about biodiversity, but here we are, pea plants, etc. There is a hollow quality to love that no one likes to talk about. To love someone is to create within yourself an endless reservoir. All anyone can give you, I start to think, but I stop the movement of the thought, because what have I ever known enough of to state so surely? And I'm going to close with a poem from a chapbook I had that came out in December that's also a collection of lyric essays called The Coma of the Comet from Burnside Review. And so I'll read the final piece in that. And they're just numbered, so this is 10.
And I've changed my screen so that it's back here.
Thank you, John. Before, it seemed like language dripped golden from the lips of so many brilliant cow-eyed boys with angular jaws. It was as if my listening made them brighter. My attention soothed them into confidence. I was a quiet girl. I did a lot of listening. Now, mostly when I hear a man talk, I want to hold my hands gently over his mouth, nose, and eyes and say, sleep, sleep. I do this sometimes to my husband, and we laugh. We agree, I am very funny. The boys are not boys anymore, and they are not golden. I am not golden anymore, and worse, when I was golden, I didn't know, and worse, I believe that is why the boys took a shine to me. Anything so pretty and blank as a canvas can convince, for a moment at least, that one is an artist. I do not believe in prophecies or geniuses. I believe in the body rebuilding itself, skin covering over a wound. I believe in the itch while it heals. I believe in moss continuing to cover a plank of sodden wood and water moving downstream. I believe in the continental divide and that I have stood atop it, my thoughts scattered by thin air. I believe in the expansion of the universe. I believe that death is final. I believe in moving home. I believe in the ocean and in crashed planes languishing on the floor of the ocean. I cannot call it belief, but I wonder if I was submerged in a past life and felt the pressure of so much water against my lungs. I remember the air escaping, almost a breath. Papa? I do not believe in past lives. In dismissing the Bermuda Triangle, Carl Sagan reminds, the thing about the ocean is you can sink in it. I believe in the ocean and that eventually it will rise and submerge my neighborhood. I believe until then in tending to plants and taking walks and watching the flowers bloom and die. I am not golden anymore. I cannot believe in miracles. I cannot close my eyes tightly enough for any danger to go away. But I know there are mysteries built into this universe. I know to search for them is enough. I know to think towards the searching is a start. My husband cuts down a scrap of wood and cobbles it together into a square-ish piece to paint on. As long as I've known him, he's made art from trash. When I was young and golden, he made me a squid from old plastic and packing material, and I hung it above my kitchen table. When he proposed, I called my grandparents, and my Nana said, I think marriage for you will be easy. For me, it's been easy. I believe in rain falling and flash floods and water receding eventually to the storm drains. I believe inexplicably in marriage. I believe in human promises. I believe I am not good yet, but I could become good with study, with practice. I believe in water and in gravity. I believe in continuity. I believe in continuing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Caroline. That was a beautiful reading. Now let me introduce our second reader for the evening, Juliana Gray. She is the author of 3 poetry collections, most recently Honeymoon Palsy. She is also the author of Role Play, winner of the Orphic Prize and the Eugene Paul Nasser Prize, and The Man Under My Skin, as well as the chapbook Anne Boleyn's Sleeve. We will put links to her books below. Her poems have appeared in Best American Poetry, Nell, the Cincinnati Review, and other journals, and her humor writing has appeared in McSweeney's Internet Tendency and elsewhere. An Alabama native, she lives in Western New York and teaches at Alfred University. Please help us welcome Juliana Gray.
Thank you. And thank you, Caroline, for that reading. I kind of hate to follow that. And your handsome cat. Mine has decided to settle in down my feet. We'll see if he stays there. Thanks for everyone for coming. Thank you for Jen and Carrie Dad and John and Catherine and everyone at Swim and the Betsy for putting this together. I'm really thrilled to be part of this series, which has been such a joy in the last few weeks. And I'm really honored to be a part of this lineup of women poets. When I started putting together a set list for this reading, I'm going to be reading all somewhat newer poems, but the project that I'm currently working on, one of the main subjects is violence against women, including domestic violence and gun violence, and that seemed a little dark for an online reading during a global pandemic. So I've chosen a few poems from that project, and then some others on different subjects. So I'm going to try to sort of start dark and go lighter toward the end. We'll see how well that works. But I should give you a couple of content warnings. I'm going to read 6 poems. The first one describes gun violence, in particular a school shooting. The 4th one describes drowning. The 5th references domestic violence. There are also some jokes. So I hope that will lighten the darkness just a bit. All right. So just so you know, I'm reading off the screen, so I know it looks a bit creepy that I'm staring at you. The first poem I'm going to read is called A Partial Catalog of Things I Used to Be Able to Do. Touch my toes, of course. Hold my breath in the deep end for almost 2 minutes, then burst the blue surface and earn my mother's worried smile. I could draw, freehand, a map of Western Europe. I don't want to brag, but I once hula hooped for a solid hour, mosquitoes sipping from my ankles as the dark shouldered in. I used to be able to teach an entire poetry class without imagining a heralding crack of gunfire advancing up the stairs, telling my students to hide under their plastic desks, locking the door if, in this imagining, I've remembered my keys. If not, trying to hold it closed, no doubt failing, a bone crash as my students, those breakable children, scream. I could recite the names of each of Zeus's sons, each daughter. I used to whistle like the airiest bird. Okay. One of the other subjects I've been writing about is my mother. She just turned 74 last week, and she's been having memory problems for the last several years. She hasn't yet been diagnosed with dementia. It's clear that she has some form of dementia, but the only diagnosis she's actually received so far is of logopenic primary progressive aphasia, which is a mouthful. But it's a brain disorder that affects the language centers. And that means she has difficulty reading and speaking, and especially finding names, names that she wants. It's very frustrating for her. So the next 2 poems I'm going to read are about that. This one is called, After My Mother is Diagnosed with Primary Progressive Aphasia, I Watch a True Crime Documentary. Something has been taken. A woman sits beside a black Bakelite phone. She worries a dull rope of pearls, touches her hand to her hair, held together with artful pins. Something has been stolen. A ladder was found leaning against the house. An open window, an empty bed, the flag of a torn curtain waving for help. The woman crosses the room and frets at a doorknob, angry that she's forgotten why she rose, what she was seeking, the name of what or whom she's lost. How long ago? If the telephone rings, how will she answer it? A parlor clock ticks. In the distance, bloodhounds cry in an ecstasy of evidence. The authorities have all been notified, the lines have been tapped. They're waiting with her somewhere, monitoring the situation. Someone will call with breathy instructions. Or slip a note beneath her door, its deranged letters cut and glued from things that happened yesterday. Okay. And the next one's a very short one called Dementia. There she is on the lake of memory in one of those absurd paddle boats shaped like a dragon or a swan. Kicking, unable to steer, she churns the water in an exhausting circle. She cannot see me waving from dry land. She's forgotten the word for swan, the words for daughter, for swim, for shore. The next poem is a sonnet that originally appeared in the Cincinnati Review. One of my very old friends is the managing editor of the Cincinnati Review. And when this poem was accepted, he texted me and he said, "I heard you wrote a poem about gin and tonic." And I said, "Write what you know." But really this poem is about ice. I live in Western New York and I hate the ice. It's called The Skaters. What a thing to trust your life to, a scenic veneer of solid safety slashed with blades. Give me 4 cubes and a gin and tonic. Give me salt for sidewalks and lacquered roads. In London, 1867, the ice gave way in Regent's Park and hundreds fell into the faithless lake. In a trice, Victorian coats and heavy skirts swelled with water. Boots and skates pulled them down. They clawed at branches, each other, the frozen shelf, mad to regain the land. 40 drowned. So cold it was, the ice resealed itself and kept them for days, preserved like florist wares under glass, reaching toward the air. My students sometimes think that poetry can only come from personal trauma. And I tell them to just pay attention to the world around you, what you see and hear and experience. And that inspiration can come from anywhere. It can come from TV, nature, pop culture. Or in the case of this poem, it was something that I heard a teenage boy in the back seat of a car say when some friends and I were driving home from a movie. And what the boy said is the title of the poem. And he said, "Why is the moon so evil?" I think they were talking about a video game, one of the Zelda games. Why is the moon so evil? Because crater is another word for scar. Because the sea keeps surging close, then pulling back, and it's getting hard not to take that personally. Because men impaled it with a flag, walked across its face, pounded boot prints into its powdery cheeks. Because it's been 40 years since they left in their awkward ship of golden foil. Because they promised one day to return. Okay. This is your, I had the good fortune to have a residency at Vermont Studio Center in February. It was right before everything went into lockdown. I was there for 2 weeks. That was incredibly productive, and I'm really grateful to have had that opportunity. So this is one of the poems that I wrote at VSC, with apologies to anyone who is a fan of astrology. This is called Blaming Mercury. Mercury's in retrograde, they say, which means as much to me as stroganoffs in platypus. Yet friends assign this planet the blame for a raft of problems: clumsiness, acne, painful menstrual cycles, fights with family or partners, especially men. I've been lucky. The men I've dated never screamed or raised a hand, never tried to frighten me. The closest was a guy who turned loud and jealous when he drank. One night, tired of his shit, I drove away and he spit on my car. The next day he acted baffled, swore he'd never do that, till I was half convinced I hadn't seen what I saw. I ended things soon after. He beat my door, demanded that I talk to him, but left when I held up a phone to the window, dialed 911. Still, I wasn't afraid. I was lucky. My grandmother wasn't. Her husband sent flowers to win her back, then killed her. I know other women who've made the choice to flee the men they loved and blame themselves, their blood, their luck, a little ball of iron sulfide fleeing toward the sun. And the last poem I'll read goes back to that idea of being inspired by anything really that you see or hear. And this one came from a line spoken by Karen Kilgariff on the podcast My Favorite Murder. If I don't know if there are any murderinos listening, but if you are, you know what I'm talking about. The poem is called Nobody's Mother, and it has an epigraph, and that's the line that Karen Kilgariff spoke on the podcast. And she said, "Can't you see from my really thick black eyeliner that I'm nobody's mother? Can't you see I've trimmed my home in sharp corners and glass? Don't you hear me saying fuck in every fucking sentence? Can't you see these cracks and lines around my sideways mouth were not inscribed by laughter? No locks on the stove, no controls on online porn. Electric outlets gape for exploratory fork or finger. What the fuck is Go-Gurt? Here are my rickety stairs. Here my long deferred roof, bucking up rusty nails. Here is my liquor cabinet, a proudly shining congregation beside the household poisons. Here is my standard human heart, beating only for itself." Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Juliana. That was
Thanks.
riveting.
Whew.
Really such a great balance. And now I'll turn the stage over to Jen Karetnik, who has gone inside.
You might have noticed I changed locations because we have a tremendous electrical storm going on outside. So now I know why they call South Florida the lightning capital of the world.
Mm.
Saw something get struck. So you might have seen my reaction there. That was fun. So if you have any questions, please send them to me right now on the chat. So I do have a question for each of you, and we'll start with Caroline. What was your impetus for writing that last poem? What was your starting point? And it wasn't your cat. I know it wasn't your cat, even though he's very handsome.
Yes.
Thank you. He is a very handsome cat. And I have to tell you quickly that when I found him, he was like on death's door, covered in mange. And I thought like, oh, we'll have a sweet boy, but he probably won't ever be a pretty boy, but he is. So I love him. He's also afraid of the storm, which is why he's right here. I wrote the series, that piece that I read finishes as grandfather. It was the first thing I wrote after that happened. I was very close to my grandfather. He was sick for a while. It was very painful, as it always is, no matter what the circumstances are. And right after I read that, right after that happened, I read The Varieties of Scientific Experience by Carl Sagan. And just as I was reading it, I was so drawn in by everything, all the concepts, but also just the beautiful way that Sagan wrote and some of the wonderful phrases. So that phrase, the coma of the comet, comes from I think like a plate in the middle of the book about the coma of the comet, which is the dust part. It's the tail that we actually see. That's called the coma. So there are all these beautiful, rich phrases that I was writing down and making notes on. And then I just used those notes as kind of an outline to begin writing what I was processing and what I was going through at that moment, kind of with the science woven in.
Because that poem seemed to me a departure from what you were reading before. So that's why. Is the whole book like that? Is it a little different than the other? Because it's a different chapbook.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So this is, it's very much of a piece. There are these 10 pieces that really kind of fit together. There are a lot of recurring themes, and it's more straightforward prose, I would say. So the middle two pieces I read were in verse. The first was in prose, but it was from a different project, I guess you would say.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, so your pieces obviously have a little darker also underside to them. or even, obviously on the surface to them. But do you find that you are drawn to those subjects more because they are more autobiographical or in your family, or because they are just a little bit easier to write about, or is there another reason?
I don't know. I think we're interested in what we're interested in. And I do watch far too much true crime. We've been in lockdown for how long? I don't know how many hours.
I don't know. Some people are really keeping track of the days. Like they write day 58, day 59, but everybody's days are different.
Yeah. Yeah, I Googled it, and they the internet seems to be marking March 13th as day one. So they said it's been 66 days. I don't know about that. But yeah, I don't know. I think your subject matter finds you, and you can't force yourself to write about something that you're not interested in. I like history. I do like some science. I don't really have much of an affinity for science. I wish I knew more about music. Those subjects just don't speak to me so much. But some darker subjects do. But then I try to leaven it with a little humor that hopefully doesn't come across inappropriately.
Do you think that changes with age? That your subjects change as you go?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think I used to be more autobiographical 20 years ago, and turns out there are more interesting subjects than myself. So I've learned more to those. Oh, sorry, Jen, I couldn't hear you.
Yes, we froze a little bit. I was saying there's nothing more interesting than ourselves.
Right? I'm just going to write about my own thoughts. Yeah. Not for long.
I do think we all go through stages as poets and writers where we have, a fascination with certain subjects.
Yeah.
Caroline, maybe you can speak to that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I love, Juliana, when you're saying that you kind of keep returning, because sometimes I think I will decide I'm done writing about this thing.
Right.
And there I am back writing about that thing, because you do have a certain amount of choice. But also, I think for me, when I set out to write, if I know this is what I want to write about, I end up writing a very boring poem because I'm not learning anything or discovering anything while I work.
Mm-hmm.
But then naturally, if you kind of allow your mind to wander or allow yourself to kind of be led into a poem, you do tend to return to common themes or even common words. And that's something I remember being very self-conscious about as a very young writer, thinking, oh, I've already written about that. I already have my poem about that. So I can't write another poem about that. And then realizing, oh gosh, no, you can write about the same, you can turn the same stone over so many times and find new moss. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah, absolutely.
Sort of connected. We have a question from an audience member. How important for Juliana and Caroline, you can both answer it. How important is poetic form to you? How do you choose to render some poems in prose form and others in verse lines? And I think this is a way to talk about also returning to the subject over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
If you vary the form, is that a way to talk about the same subject?
I can start with that. I tend to write in I write in a lot of traditional forms. I read one sonnet, and I think everything I read was loosely iambic, probably a lot of iambic pentameter or tetrameter, but I like having the rhythm under there so that even if I'm writing about something like a boy's comment about a video game or a line from a podcast, a subject that is light, that I'm still tapped into this poetic tradition and that there's still this music under there, even if the language itself, like I'm just being a smartass. but I'm doing it in iambic meters. And using forms and using meters, I find is really actually very liberating, because you can't always say the first thing that pops into your head, and you really have to sit there and consider very carefully what it is that's really important to say. Not to say that free verse writers don't put the same care into their writing, but for me, it works better to do it in traditional forms. I don't know, Caroline?
I rarely work with traditional forms, but I do a few different things. Well, first of all, I tend to vary my form quite a bit. Like when I'm writing free verse, I might write these little skinny, like the third poem I read, it's like this long skinny poem. Or sometimes I'll write much longer lines. Sometimes I'm writing in couplets. I can't stand, now the word is, I'm blanking on the word, but I can't stand 4-line stanzas. I don't mind reading other people's, but it's not something I can do. Quatrain, thank you.
Yeah.
I can't stand a quatrain, love a tercet, so I've got the little things that I kind of gravitate towards. And then also I do write a lot of prose poetry or lyric essay. So I kind of vary forms. And I would say it's so funny because I rarely sit down with a form in mind, but when I begin to write, I kind of instinctually know where I'm going with it. And I do think if I look at the work that I write in prose versus the work that I write in verse, that when you're thinking of the line as your unit versus the sentence as your unit, you're just thinking in a different way about the musicality of the language. And so I do think there's a different rhythm developed. And so I think that's probably where my instincts are kind of taking me with that, is that I kind of know the rhythm I'm thinking in, or I know the pace of my thinking. And that's really determining the length of the line or whether I'm going to get into prose. And I also, while I don't use formal constraints like the sonnet too often, I do sometimes use kind of generative constraints, whether they be writing exercises I've made up for myself, or ones I've used as a teacher or I've had in class before. I will use those sometimes. And I think it does the same thing that you're talking about, Juliana, where it kind of challenges your thinking. It gives you a little box to work within, and that can make you kind of turn things over in a different way.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Excellent. Questions they want to ask before we turn it over to Carrie, who's going to close us out? A really great reading, and it was so wonderful to listen to you both. Okay.
Oh, Juliana, I loved your reading.
Oh, thank you. Yours was so great. Now I want to read that Carl Sagan book.
Oh, it's so great.
All right, passing it to Carrie.
Well, thank you so much, Juliana and Carolina, for your wonderful readings. They were really very impactful. And want to thank you to the Betsy and FIU, Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs, and all of our sponsors and stakeholders for helping us bring this to you. And mostly, thank you for signing on the audience. We couldn't have done this without you, and it's been such a very special series of readings. We want you to continue to join our swim train. Please visit us on swim.org and subscribe to receive a poem each day. Also shop from our swim swag, which is very cool, on the website. Follow us, donate to us, but most importantly, swim with us. The water here is really great. Everyone, be well, take care of each other, and all good words. Thank you so much for joining us. John, are you ready for our
Yes,
clap
at the
off?
very end, we're going to give unmute everybody for a round of applause. You guys totally deserve it. Here we go. And we'll say goodbye.